They said she was finished. James Thorne, the man she had loved since college, didn't just divorce her. He incinerated her reputation, stole her life's work, and left her penniless on the rainy streets of Chicago. He told the press, "Emily is unstable. She'll never recover." He truly believed that she was destined to be nothing more than a cautionary tale. But fate has a wicked sense of humor. 3 years later, as the heavy gold doors of the obsidian Gala swung open, the entire room went silent. James, standing there with his stolen empire, didn't just drop his champagne glass. He froze in absolute terror. Because the woman walking down the grand staircase wasn't just a guest. She was the billionaire heiress's new partner, and she held the one thing that could destroy him, the truth. The sound of a heavy oak door slamming shut has a finality to it that echoes in your bones. For Emily Vance, that sound was the punctuation mark at the end of her life as she knew it. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of Chicago evening where the wind cuts through your coat like a serrated knife. Emily stood on the sidewalk outside the brownstone she had paid for, staring at the closed door. Beside her feet were 3 cardboard boxes. They were wet at the bottom, soaking up the slush from the gutter. "James, please," she screamed, her voice cracking. She hated herself for begging, but desperation makes you do ugly things. "My portfolio is in there. The Helios blueprints. You can't keep them." The door opened just a crack. James Thorne, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than Emily's first car, looked out. His face wasn't angry. That would have been easier to handle. His face was bored. "There are no blueprints, Emily," James said smoothly. "You're hysterical. You've been under a lot of stress. I told the board you were taking a sabbatical for your mental health. They agreed it was best if I took lead on the project." "You stole them," she whispered, the cold reality settling in her chest. "You changed the digital signatures. You erased my backups." "I optimized them," James corrected, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "You always had the vision, Emily, but you lacked the killer instinct. I'm doing us both a favor. You go. Get help. I'll build the empire." He tossed a check onto the wet pavement. It fluttered down, landing in a puddle of oil and dirty water. "Severance. Don't come back." The door slammed again. The lock clicked. And just like that, Emily Vance, the true genius behind Thorne architecture, was erased. Flash forward 2 years. The clinking of silverware against fine china was a sound Emily had learned to tune out. She adjusted the heavy tray on her shoulder, navigating the crowded floor of the Gilded Cage, an upscale jazz lounge in downtown Manhattan. She wasn't Emily the architect anymore. She was just Ellie, the waitress who was quick with a refill and didn't make eye contact with the clientele. Her hands, once used for drafting complex geometric structures, were now rough from detergent and sanitizer. "Table 4 needs a bottle of Dom Chop Chop," the manager, a sweaty man named Rick, barked at her as she passed the bar. Emily nodded, keeping her head down. She moved toward table 4, the VIP booth in the corner. As she approached, a laugh rang out, a laugh that made her blood turn to ice. She froze. The tray trembled in her hand. Sitting there, surrounded by sycophants and hangers-on, was James. He looked better than ever. Success suited him. He was wearing a bespoke suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. One arm draped casually around a woman who looked like a supermodel. This was Vanessa Caldwell, the daughter of a steel magnate. James's ticket to the big leagues. Emily wanted to run. She wanted to drop the tray and flee out the back door. But she needed this job. Her rent was late and her mother's medical bills were piling up. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped into the lion's den. "Champagne," she said, her voice low and unrecognizable. She kept her face angled away, focusing on popping the cork. "About time," James said, not even looking at her. He was too busy boasting. "The Sterling merger is practically a done deal, Vanessa. Once I get the old hag to sign off on the waterfront project, Thorne Enterprises will own the skyline." "You're so brilliant, James," Vanessa cooed, tracing a finger down his lapel. "It's not just brilliance," James said, swirling his glass. "It's about knowing when to trim the fat. You know my ex-wife. She tried to claim she designed the Helios Tower." The table erupted in laughter. The crazy one of his associates asked, completely delusional. James sighed, playing the victim perfectly. Sad, really. I heard she's working at a gas station in Ohio or something. Emily's hand shook. A splash of champagne spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. The table went silent. You clumsy idiot! Vanessa shrieked, jumping back. That's vintage Chanel. James looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. He looked at the waitress's hands, first red chapped shaking. Then he looked at her face. For a second there was no recognition. Then his eyes widened. The arrogance faltered, replaced by a shock that quickly morphed into vicious amusement. Emily! The name hung in the air like a curse. Oh my God! James laughed, a sound of pure incredulity. Ohio was too generous. You're waiting tables here. I'm working, James, Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the pounding in her ears. Something you wouldn't know how to do without stealing someone else's work. The table gasped. James's face darkened. He stood up, looming over her. Manager, he shouted. Rick came running over, sweating profusely. Mr. Thorne, is there a problem? This woman, James pointed a manicured finger at Emily, was rude, spilled a drink on my fiancé, and is harassing us. Get her out of my sight, now. Ellie, you're fired, Rick said, instantly grabbing her arm. Get your stuff. But, go! Emily looked at James one last time. He was smirking, raising his glass in a mock toast. Recovery doesn't look good on you, darling. She didn't cry. Not there. She ripped her apron off, threw it on the floor, and walked out the back exit into the alleyway. It was raining again. It always seemed to be raining when James destroyed her life. The alley behind the gilded cage was a narrow cobblestone throat of the city, choked with dumpsters and the smell of old fryer grease. Emily leaned against the wet brick wall, letting the freezing rain wash over her face. She was 32 years old, brilliant, and she had just lost her minimum wage lifeline. Stupid, she whispered to herself, hitting the back of her head against the brick. Stupid pride. She was about to head toward the subway when she heard a noise. It wasn't the scuttling of a rat. It was a human sound. A whimper. Emily paused. The city had hardened her, but it hadn't killed her heart. She squinted into the gloom further down the alley. Near the overflowing recycling bin, a figure was slumped over. It looked like a pile of rags at first. As Emily stepped closer, she saw it was an elderly woman. She was dressed in a heavy, tattered wool coat that had seen better decades, wearing a scarf wrapped tightly around her head. She was frantically digging through a pile of wet cardboard boxes, her hands trembling violently. Ma'am? Emily called out softly. The woman jumped, clutching her chest. She turned around. Her face was pale, her lips blue from the cold. She looked frail, like a gust of wind could shatter her. My pin, the woman rasped. She had a strange accent, clipped and refined, though her voice was weak. I dropped it. It rolled under here, please. It's all I have left of him. Most people would have walked away. A crazy old lady digging in the trash in a dark alley, that was a recipe for getting mugged or stabbed. But Emily saw the terror in the woman's eyes. It was the same look Emily had felt on her own face 2 years ago when the door slammed shut. Okay, Emily said, dropping her bag. Let me help. It's too cold for you to be down there. Emily got down on her hands and knees on the filthy, wet pavement. The water soaked through her jeans instantly. She didn't care. She began shifting the heavy, sodden boxes of liquor bottles. What does it look like? Emily asked. A bird, the woman whispered, shivering violently. A phoenix, gold, with a ruby eye. Emily dug deeper. Broken glass sliced her palm, but she ignored the sting. She felt around in the muck, her fingers numb. Is this it? She pulled out a small, mud-caked object. She wiped it on her sleeve. Even in the dim light of the street lamp it glittered. It was a phoenix, intricately detailed with a ruby that looked disturbingly real for a piece of costume jewelry. The old woman let out a sob, snatching it with shaking hands. You found it! You found it! She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She slumped against the dumpster, gasping for air. Her skin was gray. "You're freezing," Emily realized. The woman was going into hypothermia. Emily didn't think twice. She took off her own coat, a cheap but warm puffer jacket, and wrapped it around the old woman's shoulders. Then she pulled out her thermos from her bag. It still had lukewarm tea in it. "Drink this," Emily commanded gently. The woman drank, her eyes fixed on Emily. They were sharp eyes, strikingly blue against her wrinkled face. You gave me your coat. You're shivering." "I'm young," Emily said, rubbing her arms. "I can run to the train. You need this more." "You were crying earlier," the woman observed. She wasn't missing anything. "Why," Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Just a bad night. Ran into an ex-husband who likes to remind me that I'm nothing." "And are you nothing?" Emily looked up at the sliver of sky between the buildings. "I used to design skyscrapers. I used to dream in steel and glass. Now I just got fired for spilling champagne on a suit I couldn't afford in 10 lifetimes. So yeah, maybe he's right." The old woman fingered the phoenix pin. She looked at Emily, really looked at her as if she was measuring the structural integrity of a building. "He sounds like a fool," the woman said. Her voice was suddenly stronger. "And fools build on sand." "I should get you a cab," Emily said, checking her phone. "Where do you live? Is there a shelter?" The woman smiled a cryptic, thin smile. "No shelter. I have a ride coming. But I need you to do something for me." "What?" The woman reached into the pocket of her tattered dress underneath Emily's coat and pulled out a business card. It was thick black cardstock with gold embossing. But it wasn't a business name. It was just an address on 5th Avenue and a time. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. "My name is Sarah Fiel," the woman said. "Bring me my coat tomorrow, and bring your portfolio." "My portfolio?" Emily blinked. "I told you I don't." "A woman who digs in the mud for a stranger's memory has an eye for detail," Sarah Fiel said. "And a woman who gives her coat to a beggar has a spine of steel. I want to see what you can build." Before Emily could ask another question, a car turned into the alley. It wasn't a police car or a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek and black as midnight. The driver, a mountain of a man with a scarred jaw, jumped out and opened the rear door. He didn't look at Sarah Fiel with disgust for her rags. He bowed his head with immense respect. "Madam Sterling," the driver said, "we were worried when you slipped away from security." Sterling, Emily's breath hitched. Sarah Fiel Sterling. The matriarch of the Sterling shipping dynasty. The woman known as the Iron Ghost, because she hadn't been seen in public for a decade. The old woman climbed into the car, but before the door closed, she looked back at Emily, who was standing frozen in the rain. 9:00 a.m. "Emily," Sarah Fiel said. "Don't be late. We have an empire to topple." Emily didn't sleep that night. She spent the entire night in her tiny, drafty studio apartment digging through her digital archives. James had wiped the main servers, but he had been arrogant. He didn't know about the physical sketchbooks she kept, the raw, hand-drawn concepts that predated the CAD files. She pulled them out from under her bed. The Helios project. The graceful curves, the wind turbine integration, the eco-glass structure. It was all there. Her soul on paper. At 8:45 a.m. she stood in front of the address on the card. It wasn't an office building. It was a pre-war mansion on 5th Avenue that looked like a fortress. The windows were dark. There was no doorman, just a camera with a red blinking eye. Emily buzzed. "Name," a voice crackled. "Emily Vance. I'm here to see Sarah Fiel." The heavy iron gate clicked and swung open automatically. She walked through a courtyard filled with statues that looked vaguely threatening and entered the main hall. It was cavernous, filled with covered furniture. It smelled of lavender and old money. "In the conservatory," a voice echoed. Emily followed the sound to the back of the house. She entered a massive glass room filled with exotic orchids. Sitting at a small wrought iron table was Seraphiel. Gone were the rags. She was wearing a sharp navy blue power suit that looked like armor. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun. "You're 3 minutes early," Seraphiel said without looking up from her tea. "Good. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings." "Mrs. Sterling," Emily said, clutching her portfolio against her chest. I didn't realize who you were last night." "That was the point." Seraphiel gestured to a chair. "Sit. Do you know why I was in that alley, Emily?" "No, ma'am." "Because I am dying." Seraphiel said it as casually as discussing the weather. Emily froze. "Not today and not tomorrow." Seraphiel continued, taking a sip of tea. "But soon enough. I have no children. My board of directors is a pack of hyenas waiting for me to fall so they can strip my company for parts. They want to merge with a trendy modern firm to revitalize the brand." Seraphiel looked up, her blue eyes piercing. "They are pushing for a merger with Thorne Enterprises." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "James?" "He has charmed them," Seraphiel said with a scowl. "He showed them plans for a building called the Helios. He claims it will revolutionize green energy in urban centers. My board is eating it up. They want to announce the partnership at the Obsidian Gala in 3 months. Seraphiel reached out a bony hand. "Show me." Emily opened her portfolio. She laid out the sketches. The original dates were stamped on the bottom of the pages, dates that were 3 years old. Seraphiel studied them in silence. She traced the lines of the drawing with her finger. She looked at the calculations Emily had scribbled in the margins.